Friends and colleagues, thank you for being here today for this crucial economic analysis that will fundamentally change how you view North American power dynamics. Did you realize that in a mere 3 years, between 2017 and 2020, Canada transformed from America's unassuming, polite neighbor into its most formidable and unexpected economic competitor on the global stage? It's absolutely true, though mainstream media has barely covered this seismic shift. While President Trump was occupied with Twitter tirades at 3 a.m. and cable news appearances, Canada was methodically and systematically dismantling America's industrial might piece by strategic piece. The most stunning and unprecedented aspect of this dramatic shift is that it wasn't achieved through a traditional trade war with retaliatory tariffs or a military confrontation with troops at the border. Instead, it was a shrewd, patient, and brilliantly calculated business strategy, executed flawlessly by Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney and his team of economic advisors, which effectively neutralized and countered every move Trump attempted in a sophisticated maneuver that left the entire U.S. government and business community reeling in confusion and disbelief. Through careful strategic planning spanning multiple years, Canada successfully secured Boeing's multi-billion-dollar contracts worth over $40 billion total, witnessed and accelerated the dramatic decline of American tourism revenues by hundreds of billions annually, and systematically siphoned high-paying manufacturing jobs from the very heart of American industrial centers that had defined U.S. economic power for a century. But here's the real masterstroke that stunned international observers. Canada didn't need to retaliate with punitive tariffs that would hurt their own consumers or engage in public insults that would damage diplomatic relations. They did something far more effective and devastating to American interests. Canada masterfully turned Trump's own aggressive strategies against him, like economic judo, employing strategic patience, long-term planning over quarterly profits, and one of the world's most overlooked and underestimated assets in international relations, Canadian composure and diplomatic sophistication. While Trump was publicly fixated on attacking windmills, building border walls that would never be completed, and tweeting inflammatory statements that alienated allies, Carney was quietly and methodically redrawing the entire map of global economic influence without fanfare or publicity. Now, after these transformative years, America is left holding the bag empty-handed, its national pride deeply wounded, its economy absorbing a significant and potentially permanent blow to its foundations, and its global leadership questioned by allies and adversaries alike. This, however, is not the conclusion of this remarkable story. It is merely the dawn of Canada's unprecedented ascent to economic superpower status. Continue reading to discover exactly how one nation of 38 million people managed to pivot away from the United States almost entirely unnoticed by American media and politicians until it was too late to reverse. The next chapter in this extraordinary saga is truly unbelievable and will reshape how you understand global economics. The international community looked on absolutely stunned as Donald Trump the self-professed master of the deal, who wrote books about negotiation, sought to command the world stage with his erratic, unpredictable diplomatic style that broke every rule of international relations. A style defined by its volume, audacity, unpredictability, and frequent chaos that left diplomats scrambling. He was quick to anger over perceived slights, quick to tweet threats at foreign leaders, and always ready to weaponize tariffs and trade wars as his first resort rather than last. Trump's vision for the country was founded on the principle that an America First policy would inevitably secure wins for the United States at everyone else's expense. But as the dust from his chaotic administration began to settle and economists analyzed the data, a critical question emerged that demanded an answer. Did this aggressive approach actually succeed in strengthening America, or did it catastrophically backfire? Imagine the shocking scene unfolding in corporate boardrooms across America. Boeing, long celebrated as the crown jewel of America's aerospace sector since World War II, is now signing away multi-billion-dollar contracts to Canadian firms in Montreal and Toronto. How could this have possibly happened to America's most strategic industry? It wasn't through military force or political pressure from Ottawa. It was a straightforward business decision driven by economic fundamentals, one that struck at the very foundation of American manufacturing superiority and technological leadership. For generations spanning back to the Wright brothers, cities like Wichita, Kansas, Seattle, Washington, and manufacturing hubs in South Carolina were the undisputed global centers of the U.S. aerospace industry, employing millions in high-wage jobs. Today, these once thriving areas risk becoming ghost towns filled with empty factories, victims of a strategic error so massive that it created an opening for Canada to completely dominate the aerospace sector within a single decade. Under Mark Carney's brilliant leadership and strategic vision, Canada didn't just aim to compete with the U.S. in aerospace manufacturing, it aimed to completely surpass and replace it by offering a compelling blend of more affordable labor costs, superior efficiency through automation, better educated workers, and absolutely dependable production schedules that Boeing couldn't ignore. Companies in Quebec like Bombardier and startups in Ontario are now assembling the advanced aircraft once proudly built exclusively in America by American hands. This wasn't merely a secondary project or minor subcontracting for Canadian labor. It was the absolute core of America's aerospace pride and technological superiority, now operating entirely under Canadian oversight and control. While Trump's tariffs were supposedly designed to penalize and punish Canada for unfair trade practices, they backfired spectacularly in ways no economist predicted. Within a shocking 72-hour period following tariff announcements, Boeing's market value plummeted by a staggering $47 billion in market capitalization. This was no minor stock fluctuation for any corporation to absorb. It was an extinction-level event threatening the company's survival. It wasn't a hostile takeover by foreign investors or government intervention. It was a cold, carefully calculated move by Boeing executives to escape the instability and unpredictability of Trump's America in favor of a partnership with the calm, reliable, and highly skilled Canadian workforce that offered stability, the high-paying manufacturing jobs that once fueled American cities and created the middle class. have permanently migrated north across the border, and the consequences for those American communities have been absolutely catastrophic and irreversible. Entire towns built around Boeing factories are dying. But the issue extends far beyond simple job losses and unemployment statistics. It's fundamentally about the complete erosion of America's core identity as a manufacturing titan that won World War II through industrial might. When Boeing, the ultimate symbol of U.S. industrial strength and innovation, voluntarily opts to relocate critical operations to Canada, it broadcasts a stark and undeniable message to the entire world. America is no longer the premier destination for high-level advanced manufacturing and may never be again. This dramatic and historic shift raises urgent questions about whether this devastating outcome was inevitable, given global trends, or a direct consequence of Trump's misguided policies and leadership failures. Las Vegas, America's glittering neon jewel in the desert, has historically been a powerful and irresistible draw for international tourists seeking entertainment. However, in a shocking development that casino executives never anticipated, Canada's quiet but effective economic resistance has begun to systematically siphon the lifeblood from this iconic American city. For many prosperous years, Canadian visitors were responsible for nearly 40% of Las Vegas's total revenue, sustaining its dynamic entertainment, gambling, and hospitality sectors through good times and bad. That steady, reliable stream of Canadian money flowing south has now started to dramatically dwindle to a trickle. The reason is simple, deliberate, and it's chilling for American businesses. A coordinated nationwide boycott reflecting a fundamental shift in consumer habits, strategically engineered to strike American businesses where they are most vulnerable, their revenue streams. Travel from Canada to the U.S. has dropped by an astounding 38% year over year, and this sharp downward trend shows absolutely no signs of reversing or stabilizing. This isn't a momentary dip, seasonal anomaly, or temporary reaction to events. It's a strategic, sustained action intended to send an unmistakable signal to Washington. Canadians are consciously and deliberately avoiding American tourist destinations entirely, with many now choosing European cities like Stockholm, Berlin, Copenhagen, and Helsinki over Las Vegas, Orlando, or New York. This massive cultural pivot is unmistakable and likely permanent. A trip to Vegas, once a common and celebrated Canadian vacation tradition, has transformed into an act of protest and resistance against Trump's America. Consequently, Las Vegas no longer holds the same irresistible appeal for its northern neighbors who once filled its hotels. The devastating repercussions extend far beyond the famous casino floors and gaming tables. Local establishments, family restaurants, retail shops, and performance venues that critically depended on the reliable influx of Canadian tourists are now experiencing severe negative effects threatening their survival. Hotels struggling with occupancy, luxury retailers with empty stores, and famous buffets that were once filled with Canadian patrons are now contending with empty tables, unoccupied rooms, and mounting debts. The economic ripple effect spreading through Nevada is becoming too significant and damaging to overlook or minimize. For the U.S., the problem is not just about billions in lost income and tax revenue. It's about permanently diminishing the cultural magnetism and global standing that Las Vegas once commanded as the entertainment capital of the world. The critical question now facing American policymakers is how deep this boycott will cut into the economy and whether American tourism can ever bounce back from this new form of sophisticated economic warfare initiated by its closest ally and neighbor. While Trump was preoccupied with imposing random tariffs and waging trade wars with China and Mexico simultaneously, Mark Carney was discreetly executing one of the most masterful and effective economic strategies of recent times that will be studied in business schools for decades. Canada's remarkable ascent is not predicated on brute force, military might, or head-on conflict with its larger neighbor. Instead, it is brilliantly built on the strategic use of patience, surgical precision, and long-term planning spanning decades, effectively deploying sophisticated economic warfare to systematically weaken America's influence without firing a single shot or deploying a single soldier. In this economic contest for continental dominance, the primary weapon was the Canadian consumer's wallet, multiplied by millions. As the world focused obsessively on Trump's unpredictable moves and Twitter storms, Canada was quietly mobilizing a comprehensive national boycott that would fundamentally rattle America's economic core. Canadians who were once extremely reliable patrons of American brands from childhood began to consciously pivot away from U.S. products and services across every category. This was not a spontaneous grassroots reaction or unorganized protest. It was a synchronized, government-supported economic campaign designed to make one point crystal clear to Washington. Canada would not stand by passively as America attempted to impose its will through bullying. It would retaliate brilliantly in an unforeseen manner through the coordinated daily purchasing decisions of millions of its citizens acting in concert. At supermarkets from Vancouver to Halifax, shoppers started scrutinizing product labels like never before, actively seeking out and deliberately avoiding American-made products that would benefit U.S. companies regardless of quality or price. The movement expanded rapidly further throughout Canadian society. Traditional vacations that historically brought hundreds of thousands of Canadians to destinations like Las Vegas, Disneyland, Miami Beach, and Colorado ski resorts were systematically rerouted to Europe, Asia, and other global locations far from America. Every single dollar spent outside the United States served as a direct economic vote against the nation that had attempted to penalize Canada economically through aggressive tariffs. The devastating effects were not confined to the tourism sector alone. They spread rapidly like economic cancer throughout the entire U.S. economy. From the complete downturn at ski resorts in Montana and Vermont, to the permanent closure of gas stations and family diners reliant on Canadian travelers along the border, smaller American businesses began to feel the crushing impact immediately. The fundamental shift was not just about temporarily losing Canadian customers during Trump's term. It was about a permanent generational change in consumer mindset and behavior. Canadians were deliberately choosing alternatives forever, actively cultivating a lasting preference for European and Asian goods over American products. This was the beginning of a seismic behavioral shift with potential consequences lasting for decades beyond Trump. While Donald Trump's presidency was consistently defined by incendiary rhetoric, personal attacks, and erratic policymaking that confused allies, Mark Carney's approach to international diplomacy was grounded in a single core principle that never wavered: stability above all else. Carney's exceptional leadership as Canada's Prime Minister was never about seeking the spotlight or generating sensational headlines for personal glory. It was about meticulously building lasting relationships and forging strategic alliances that would position Canada for greater global influence in the 21st century and beyond. As Trump's chaotic style systematically alienated America's traditional allies from Britain to Germany, Carney quietly but effectively established Canada as a dependable and competent partner on the world stage, ultimately outmaneuvering Trump at his own game without Trump even realizing it was happening. One of Carney's most pivotal and brilliant moves was his ability to identify and immediately act on emerging global shifts before others recognized them. While Trump was constantly embroiled in trade disputes with China, threatening tariffs on Europe, and distancing himself from long-standing NATO allies through insults, Carney was in Berlin meeting privately with German Chancellor Angela Merkel, finalizing comprehensive trade agreements with Sweden and Denmark, and reinforcing critical defense partnerships with nations like Finland, Norway, and the Netherlands. While Trump was actively creating adversaries and enemies through hostile rhetoric, Carney was systematically cultivating allies, building partnerships founded on mutual respect, absolute trust, and long-term predictability. The contrast couldn't have been more stark or consequential. Carney's sophisticated diplomatic strategy was straightforward, yet highly effective in its execution. As America's reliability wavered dramatically under Trump's erratic leadership, Canada steadily emerged as a cornerstone of absolute stability in the Western world that others could depend on. This was more than just opportunistically filling a vacuum left by the retreating U.S. It was about deliberately positioning Canada as a global leader in critical areas where America had completely abdicated its historic role, such as climate change leadership, international trade, facilitation, and defense cooperation with NATO allies. Carney's adept handling of these complex international issues ensured that Canada not only maintained its existing valuable alliances, but also attracted entirely new partners eager to distance themselves from the dangerous volatility of Trump's America. One of his most notable and strategic accomplishments involved his intensive work within NATO itself. As the U.S. retreated from its international obligations and threatened to leave NATO entirely, Carney made absolutely sure that Canada remained a steadfast, reliable presence in the alliance, playing a crucial role in maintaining its unity, focus, and deterrent capability against Russia. While Trump's divisive language created unprecedented friction within NATO, nations like Germany, Finland, France, and Sweden, once heavily dependent on American leadership since World War II, began looking to Canada as the new center of gravity and leadership within the Atlantic Alliance. With Carney actively spearheading efforts to bolster defense cooperation across Europe and the Arctic, Canada's influence grew exponentially. His success wasn't confined to closed-door diplomatic circles. His work was a masterclass in leveraging quiet competence and reliability to fundamentally reshape the global landscape, proving definitively that while noise gets temporary attention, strategic action secures lasting results and real power. This foundation of international trust quickly translated into tangible, measurable economic outcomes worth hundreds of billions